Hey coaches, let's talk about wall walks. A wall walk is one way to work towards a particular type of handstand. In this case, it's a wall facing handstand. I'm going to show you some progressions to get people to a place where they can work on something that is like that, and then talk a little bit about form. So, our progression can start from an inchworm. So, we're going to have hands variously high, and the main goal here is that we're looking to approximate something like a handstand, so hands, shoulders, and hips in a line, regardless of how much bend there is at the hips, at some point in the movement. So the higher up our hands are, the lower our legs are, the easier. The higher up our legs go, the lower our hands are, the harder. So the most kind of accessible variation of this is going to be like a plank on the wall, walking down to a pike. So you can see I moved my hands, I also moved my feet a little bit. That's totally fine. I got to something where I was hinged at the hip, but my hands, shoulders, and hips were all in the line, approximating something like a handstand. We can do this from the floor. We can also do something like this from an elevated plank. So in this case, I'm in a nice strong plank. I'm going to actually just press my hips back and maybe take a little bit of a step to come into this slightly different kind of pike position with my hands somewhat elevated. There's not a lot of movement that happens there. It's more like a plank to a down dog transition than like an inchworm or a wall walk. So we can take this to the floor. We can be in our plank, walk out to our plank, and then think about walking ourselves in a little bit for this handstand-like work. For like a wall walk situation, we don't necessarily have to come all the way back to standing for this to be effective. The next step up would be elevating this feet to some amount to do something like a pike walkout. So lots of different ways to get into this. We can walk our feet back, step up onto our box, and then walk back to get hips somewhat over hands. We could walk back out for a break. Again, walking back, walking out. And you can imagine variously sized boxes where we're getting more of an angle at the hips with hands, shoulders, hips more and more stacked. And sometimes people might need a little spotting. If I was spotting somebody working on this, I would kind of be behind their sacrum. The main thing I want to avoid is them tipping over this way, so I would be able to press their body back with hands so that they would put more weight back on their feet. That may or may not ever come up for you. From there, we have various heights of the wall walk. So our basic start position is toes in the corner, plank. From here, I could just take a little step up, press my hips up, and then come back down. I guess the main thing I like to tell people is have enough energy for the return trip so that we're not just collapsing down and hurting ourselves. So that was a fairly low wall walk. So again, that's kind of how most of them are going to start. Hips coming up in this case, but if I want to go higher, I'm going to have to walk my hands in a bit, and I can walk in however far I want. I want to have a little energy to walk my hands back out to gently lower my feet versus walking up super high, getting exhausted, and then trying to come right back down. Works out most of the time, but if people get very vertical and have to fall, I wouldn't recommend doing it here because a little fall to the side could really hurt. So we want to make sure we have enough room to get down, however, we're going to come down side to side. So in its fullest expression, the wall walk, we're starting in this plank, we're reaching legs up, walking in to a fairly vertical handstand. Some people say nose and toes, like you want to touch your nose to the wall while your toes are touching the wall. I think that's a fun goal. That's going to take most people past stacked with their shoulders, and a lot of people aren't going to be able to do that. But we're looking at like fairly vertical. So what are some points of form that we might want to focus on for people? Main thing is like our hollow body position or avoiding this like big arch in the back. So this might help people feel a little stronger with their arms but actually being more stacked and having core activation and hips relatively neutral is going to just be a much stronger position. So if you see people getting really high and very stacked, but their back is super arched, that might be something to focus in on and actually take them to a slightly lower position where they can hold that core activation a little better. Arms outside of shoulders. So if we're stacked straight up, this can be very hard. So we actually want hands to be a little bit wider. That's going to allow us to get to a more upright overhead position. And some people may choose to go very wide on that, and that's going to affect wrist stuff eventually. So that's sort of the next point is, this would be ideal hand position. If my hands are up here, fingers straight forward would allow me the most sort of torque into the floor, but a little bit outside of shoulders and a little bit turned is probably going to work well for most people's shoulder and wrist mobility. A lot of times we'll see people walking like this. That doesn't leave a lot of extra room to move to create stability in the shoulders. So if I'm walking with my hands out like this, that may be fine, but ideally in this situation, we can just have the hands turned out slightly, hands or arms slightly outside of shoulders. And then looking for that hand, shoulder, hip alignment. I think a lot of times people would do even a pike and like kind of be shoulders over hands, but hips way back, versus trying to get hands, shoulders, and hips in more of a line. So this is usually going to be like that thought of like pressing the chest down towards the feet or towards the floor or towards the wall through the shoulders to have a slightly better sort of stacked position, which will make people stronger in their handstands, which is kind of what we're working on here. So there you have it, some thoughts and places to enter into with our wall walk progression.